Hey everyone, this is Curve Knight, and today we're going to be taking a look at an updated Rotovisor list. So, Rotovisor did get some support in the latest set 8. Unfortunately, I don't really think it's what the deck needed. You can definitely play it. I'm currently not playing this build, but I'll tell you what you can probably take out if you want to try it out. Currently, as this Rotovisor stands as the meta, those new cards don't really do anything. As I said, they aren't even good enough to make it into the current build of the deck. But obviously, it's a really fun deck. Attacking your opponent 5 times, restanding rear guards feels always really nice. But of course, the deck still has a plethora of problems that have yet to be fixed. And here's to hoping that someday Bushiroad decides to fix it so this deck becomes actually functional. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and hop straight into the deck profile. So starting off where we always do, of course, with the ride line, we are just going to be playing Rotovisor ride line. It's the one that was made for the deck, so it's obviously pretty good for it. So obviously our Rotovisor is just your basic starter. The grade 1 Erde Rotovisor, when he is rode upon by a grade 2 Rotovisor, search your deck for an arena card, add it to your hand. Arena is obviously being your set order. This is a Bronze Gate deck. And then the grade 2 skill is a little bit less useful. Instead of searching for an arena, you check top 7. You can add either an arena or any grade 3 Rotovisor. Currently, we only have 2 targets, one of which being Persona Ride, and then add it to your hand. But if you don't add anything, you can call him out from Soul, which you will do like on occasion, because this deck doesn't really use that much Soul, so just like losing 1 Soul isn't really making much of a difference. And even if you do call him out, it's not the end of the world because he does get an extra 5k whenever he does attack. So he's just a 15k base, making him pretty solid as an attacker if you do desperately need one. Now, of course, the main man of the hour is the Glanzel Rotovisor. If you have 3 or more arenas in your order zone, he gets another extra 5k to the front row, meaning that if you Persona Ride on that 3rd turn and you set up your 3 orders, you can be getting a plus 15 to the front row. But his main skill is at the end of the battle he attacks, you counterblast 2 in order to choose the same number of rear guards as you have arenas in your order zone and restand them. You also draw a card, and then if you have 3 or more arenas, all the units that could stood by his ability get an extra 5k power. So as you can tell, the main game plan of the deck is to set up as many arenas as you can as quickly as possible. You just want to hit 3 as soon as possible, which previously was not doable until turn 4, but with 1 extra card you can theoretically get to that 3 arenas on that first turn 3. Alright, so moving on to the main deck, of course we are going to be playing the 3 extra Persona Rides. Not only are they searchable, but this being a multi-attack deck, Persona Ride is very, very appreciated. When on your Persona Ride turns, when you have the 3 arenas set up, your numbers do get kind of crazy. Like we're talking about getting close to the 60s numbers on these last 2 swings. Like I think it goes like 40-40, like 30, and then like 60-50 or something like that. But obviously Persona Ride is very important for that. And now for the other grade 3, unfortunately this is part of the engine that you do have to play. The Trombont Rotovisor, so searchable off the rideline since he is a grade 3 Rotovisor. He kind of just fixes the deck's issues. This card is basically just a band-aid, but once per turn you can EV3 in order to choose one of your Vanguard's auto skills, and its cost becomes Counterblast 1. So this makes it so that your opponent cannot damage deny you the 2 CB. As long as you have 1 CB, you can always just restand and get your 5 attacks. And then his other skill, when he gets restood by your Vanguard, basically, you can Soul Blast 1, choose any number of arenas in your order zone and stand them. Then if you stood 3 or more, you can Counterblast 1 in order to give it your front row rear guards another 10k power. So definitely very much needed in the deck because this is just your training wheels to make your Vanguard not as bad. So just having him on board is just almost always a must. You always just want to put him usually in the front row because he does gain that extra power. And it basically means that you can just freely use your arenas, because sometimes in the early to mid game you run out of arenas to like put on hit pressure, and then your opponent is just going to take the attacks that don't have on hits. So he makes it so that you can have pretty much every single attack you have an on hit. Now for our last grade 3 card, we are going to be playing the Fire Regalis. Of course, this is, you can remove it from the drop zone in order to check top 5 and call something. Obviously, this is Bronchi deck. We can't play any other orders. It is very important that you are playing your arena every single turn. So having a Regalis piece that doesn't need to get activated is very, very useful for the deck. And then once again, this is a very piece-reliant deck. Like I said, this card is very needed in order to take your training wheels off, or put... I don't know, whatever the phrase is. But obviously this helps you get all your pieces. You have a lot of very important pieces, so just being able to dig for them is very important and very necessary. All right, moving on into the grade 2s, we of course are going to be playing the 4 copies of Compassionate Mechanic. So long as you have, if it can focus, there we go. If you have 2 or more set or 2 or more arenas in your order zone, she gets another 5k, so she becomes a 15k base attacker. Of course, that's only going to be happening on turn 3 because there is no way to set a arena on turn 1 or set 2 on turn 2. But at the end of the battle, she attacks. If your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater and you have an arena in your order zone that you tapped for her attack, you can EB3 to draw a card, and then you choose one of your rear guards and you give it 5k. So of course, your main game plan is to always have these 2 in the front row, and then you're just going to have, hopefully if you have your 3 arenas or 2 arenas, it doesn't really matter. You go ahead and swing with this mechanic, tap the first arena, and then at the end of battle, draw a card to give this 5k. This is now swinging for 18. You can tap the second order, give it that same on-hit skill, and then this attacks, and then you resend both of them, and then this will resend the other 2, so you can just swing in again. So these are your 2 ideal front row rear guards, which is why it's kind of hard to justify having any other front row rear guards in this deck, just because these 2 enable so much for your deck. But you know, right, so continuing on, we have 3 copies of Combine Rusher. Now, Combine Rusher is a pretty old card, so you're probably somewhat familiar with it. When he attacks grade 3 or greater unit, if your order zone has 2 or more set orders, he gets an extra 10k, and then whenever you put a set order, you can CB1 to call him from drop. So like I said, your front row tends to be pretty compromised. You always want to be having Compassionate Mechanic or the Trabant in your front and the Trombot in your front row. So if you ever whiff on either of those, or you have to like intercept, or it gets retired or attack into it, this guy or Combine Rusher is always a very good backup choice. Like, yeah, you're missing out on the draw. If you don't have the Trabant, then you're gonna have to counterblast 2 for your Vanguard skill. But if you're able to, he's a very, very solid attacker. He's only 5k less than Compassionate Mechanic, assuming you're attacking into the Vanguard. But you know, he's just very good, especially in the early game. One of the issues is it's really easy to get your early game hits to actually hit. So you usually are going to be getting only the energy charge, because most of the time you won't be able to counterblast in the early game. But Combine Rusher is definitely very solid in the sense that he gives you an outlet for that counterblast, so that when you attack with your Vanguard boosted by like maybe an 8k, and your opponent just probably doesn't want to guard it, you make it an on-hit. Okay, it's a free on-hit counter charge. If you don't want to play the Combine Rusher, or it's like a little too expensive, I think he's still a little pricey, I would definitely recommend the new double rare from the latest set. These cards are very similar in what they do. They both can call themselves from drop. The difference is this costs energy, and you do also have to rest one of your arenas. But as competence for that, he does gain plus 5k shield, so he gets +5/+5 as long as you have those 2 or more arenas. Now of course that's not something that's going to happen until turn 3 anyway, but that's usually the turn where Combine Rusher is going to be at 20 anyway. So basically what you're doing is you're swapping the CB costs for energy cost. Technically you lose out on an arena rest on hit pressure, but you know, most of the time they're not going to hit, like I said, so it doesn't really matter that much. This is only 5k less than a Combine Rusher. He's still hitting for 15, but instead you get a 10k intercept. But you know, the same rule still applies with this card and with Combine Rusher, which is the fact that you definitely just want Compassionate Mechanic plus Trabant as your front row. So having other front row attackers is not always, you know, greatly beneficial. Alright, so moving on, finishing off with our last grade 2 units, I'm going to be playing 3 copies of the Pride Cycler. Now, I haven't actually gone over any of these in a video, but his skill is the same as all the other ones. There we go. So when he is placed on rearguard from hand specifically, or he's discarded in order to ride from your ride phase, you can Soul Blast 1, and if you are playing a deck with Persona Ride, you get to add a, what's it called? A Persona ticket? Yeah, Persona Blitz order, basically. It's a 10k shield. And then, of course, when he attacks grade 3 or greater variant, he gets another 5k. So this is also another backup attacker. He is a 15k attacker, but most of the time you're just, if you draw into him, you're just pitching him in order to get the Persona shield, just because this deck has a lot of like issues with guarding. It's a very offensively oriented deck, so having something that is a little bit of defense is definitely appreciated. And like I said, he does dual duty, making it so that you don't minus as hard when you ride up. He's also another way to use your soul. This deck doesn't really use that much soul. I think the only thing that's realistically reusing soul is the Trabant Rotovisor, and you are getting a lot of excess soul thanks to things like Bubble Mine, so soul is never really an issue. All right, so moving on into our set orders. I am still playing the tried and true method of the 4-1 ratio on the arenas. Obviously, this one is much better. This one is the way the arenas work. Hopefully, you figured it out by now. I have been mentioning it a lot. But basically, whenever your units attacks, you can rest the arenas in order to give it a new skill. Of course, the new skill being that on hit, it gets a special effect. So obviously, this one, the Urban City, is whenever your attack hits, you either countercharge or energy charge 2. Obviously, the countercharge is much more beneficial, but especially in the early game when you tend to be hitting a lot, it's kind of difficult to counterblast unless you see the Combine Rusher. So a lot of times you'll end up energy charging 2, which if you do end up playing the grade 2 double rare, definitely helps you just pay for that cost. And then the other arena, because we want to be playing 5, is just an on-hit EB3 in order to draw 1. Normally, if I'm going second, I would probably search this one out first because you do have the extra 3 energy. But outside of that, you're always going to be wanting to use your 3 of energy on either Trabant or Compassionate. Do note that it's kind of hard to get back up to the point where you can energy blast 3 again, because this energy charges 2 instead of 3, which means you need to get 2 hits off the Urban City in order to kind of pay the cost for this or for either of your 2 really good cards. So most of the time you're only going to be using this like once or like twice if you happen to be like hitting with Urban Cities a lot without any counterblast. But like I said, you're almost always going to countercharge with this whenever you do have it, whenever you do have access to actually hitting. Obviously the 5 ratio is just there in case you damage check like one of these or you discard one, because currently the deck isn't really playing any way to get them back. There is a way to get them back from damage or drop, but I don't really think it's worth it. So I would rather just play the 5 just to kind of guarantee that we can at least get the 3 set orders into the order zone. All right, moving on into the grade 1s, we do actually have a brand new card here. This is a promo that was released a couple months back for Rotovisor, and it's kind of supposed to be there to fix the deck, but it does it in a really bad way. It does fix the deck, but it does it not very well. This is Iceland Glewinner. Sure. When it's placed on rear, you can counterblast 1 in order to search for an arena card, reveal it, and add it to your hand. So already off the bat, that's pretty solid. The problem with it is that it is a counterblast 1, which we've already seen is not very good. Like, yeah, we have access to countercharge, which makes it more manageable, and kind of the whole reason why we have to commit so much to countercharge. But the main part of the skill is that if your opponent is on grade 3, you can actually put an arena from your hand into the order zone, which of course does not count as playing it, meaning that if you go second, only if you go second, you can get 3 arenas in your order zone on your first grade 3 turn. Otherwise, if you're going first, that doesn't really do anything. I guess you could use this on turn 4 when you Persona Ride, get the 4th arena, but honestly, what the deck really needed is a way to set another arena, and unfortunately being locked behind going second is not really enough to save the deck. Now he does actually have another skill which I almost always forget about, which is if you are on grade 3, he gets plus 2k. This is only in back row, so he's a 10k booster, but he is not a 10k attacker. And then he also gives everything in the column semi-resist, which is the inability to be retired by opponent's card effects. It's better than nothing. Like, this deck already has problems with gaining advantage, which is why cards like Combine Rusher and even the new Double Rare are somewhat solid in terms that they can rebuild your board, since this deck is not very well equipped in order to do that. So just having extra protection it's better to have it than not. So, you know, can't complain there. Okay, and then for our last grade 1, we are just going to be playing the 4 copies of Bubble Mine. Getting damage denied really sucks, and as you've already seen in this deck, we have a lot of cards that are using Counterblast. We got Combine Rusher, we've got the new promo, we even have Trabant, who, even though he reduces the Counterblast to 1, he uses a Counterblast himself, so it doesn't really change the fact that you still need 2 CB, but having Bubble Mine just makes it that much easier to use up your Counterblast. It makes it so that you don't really have to think about not using a specific skill, and just during the battle phase is fine because, you know, all your Counterblast tends to happen during the battle phase anyway, and the only unfortunate part about Bubble Mine is we don't really have a good way to use a soul. I think the only thing that really uses soul is the Trabant, and then of course the Pride Cyclers, the Rainbow Cyclers, but outside of that, you know. So as a quick shout out, we do have the new grade 1 that was released in the set. He is an on place if you are on grade 3, so another disappointment. Give something 5k, which, you know, is solid because, you know, you have restanding, so you're taking advantage of that 5k twice, but, you know, it's not really that good enough to warrant playing him, especially since this other skill is when he's put on Guardian Circle, if you have a grade 3 Rotovisor, you can EB2 in order to give him 10k. The EB2 is negligible. All you have to do is hit with an arena and you can already pay that cost, so that's fine. But the problem is, if you play this card, you really have to pick between one or the other. Are you going to use this card as a 15k defensive, or are you going to call it and give something 5k? It does have versatility in that sense, but unfortunately, with the amount of non-engine we have access to, I think that this card being another non-engine piece kind of isn't justifiable. Like, I think if the deck could support the set order package, and you could call this, give something 5k, and then move this to Guardian Circle, EV2, and give it another 10k shield, I think this card would be solid. But unfortunately, the fact that Rotovisor has too many cards that make up its main engine, it just doesn't have enough room for non-engine to be supporting this kind of playstyle. Alright, so finishing off with the typical stuff, of course we do have the 4 PGs. Play Elementaria if you really want to take this deck seriously. And then, of course, for our trigger lineup, we actually have something kind of interesting. Now, I left this deck to my deck tester, Orion, and this is kind of what he came up with, so I'm not entirely sure on the reason for those ratios, but I think they're solid. So we actually have 3 fronts. Fronts are always obviously very solid in this deck, considering you're attacking with your 2 rear guards, and then you're restanding them, so you're going to get full benefit from front triggers every single time. We are playing 3 draw triggers, which, you know, I can also see, like I said, this deck doesn't really make any advantage. So having the ability to, you know, get some draw triggers is definitely very much appreciated. And of course, that leaves us with the last triggers, which of course is filled out by crits, 5 crits. Now you obviously don't need to be playing Decacop because, as I said, this deck doesn't really use Soul, so it's kind of a moot point. And then, of course, as always, we are playing just 4 vanilla heals. You know, this is the best Broncate heal. Don't at me, but you know, obviously, same thing as I always say. If you want to play counter heals, go for it. But personally, I don't really recommend it, especially not this, even not this format. And then, of course, finishing off the deck profile, we have our auto win button. All right, so that's going to do it for my Rotovisor deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to do those YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.